The light blue sea reflected the chroma stars and the source of life. Her eyes wandered from the water up to the sky, and she was now staring directly at the beautiful night-black structure. Cheyenne thought and came to the conclusion that it must be made out of umbraroar. It was at least surrounded by a black mist, and the interior moved like water startled by a wave. Klissave followed her gaze, and then confirmed her reasoning. "Ah, you're looking at the Nux Astrum Vitae, huh? Beautiful, isn't it, Angel? Almost as enchanting as you are. The name Nux Astrum Vitae is in the Yin-Yang language and does not mean source of life. People only introduced this name because they found it more appropriate. The correct translation would be Night Star of Life, which in my opinion sounds actually nicer than source of life. You've probably never known what it's made of before, but since the smart, lovely Klissave told you something about the life force umbraroar, you're guaranteed to be able to guess it. But, my pretty angel, that's not all. Nux Astrum Vitae is not only composed of umbraroar, it even is the origin of this power. There, new life is produced and old is processed. When a body dies, all life force and soul emerge from it, atomize into microscopic particles that no longer can be seen with the naked eye, and rise to become the night star of life. There, the umbraroar is regenerated and processed, splits up again and returns to Earth. The cycle of life is fascinating, isn't it, sweetie? Cheyenne nodded. I wonder how the world came to be. It is hard to imagine that everything was simply there, or that nature itself is so clever that it invented these cycles, without which there would be no life. But before the apocalypse, the world was also very different. I would love to know what happened back then. Will I ever know? Klissave rode on to catch up with Adukas, who was already trotting quite far ahead of the trail. However, the girl continued to look at the source of life and was lost in thoughts. Suddenly, she felt a strong grip on her right foot and shortly afterwards on her right forearm. Before she could even look in that direction or realize what was going on, she was torn from her big horse and landed with her back on the hard stone floor. The impact was tremendously painful, and she could not breathe for a short time. Cheyenne narrowed her eyes in pain and heard only the startled neighing of Falconheart and Adukas barking in the distance. Again she was grabbed and pulled up until the girl was on her feet. She coughed and gasped. Then she opened her eyes and saw two men in metal armor. A third, stronger one stood behind her and held her tightly. He dragged her to a tree, pressed her tightly against it, and held a knife to her neck. The other two laughed and rejoiced. Finally, we found you! Ha ha ha, little bitch! Because of you, we had to sit all night on these wretched horses, and now we feel every single darn bone. But at least we finally have you, and we are guaranteed to be promoted. I'm sure the commander will be pleased. The Knights of the Research Laboratory. Cheyenne breathed abruptly and groaned in pain. She got scared and could already see her life passing by and fast forward. She couldn't even move to try to fight back. The knight who held her down pressed her so hard against the tree that she felt like it was going to break every single bone of her. As if that wasn't bad enough, the knight also delighted in the sight of seeing her pain-distorted face. Suddenly, one of the rear two men in armor was knocked over. Adukas had jumped against his back and growled at him threateningly. The other knight, frightened, took a step back and stared at his colleague, threatened by the fairy wolf. He couldn't stay anymore because he fell too to the ground. Behind him stood Klissave with a large, beautiful sword that looked like it was made of ice. He had slashed the knight's back with it, even though he was wearing metal armor. The cut was apparently very deep, for the enemy lay motionless on the ground, blood gushing out of his mouth and coming out of his wound on his back. The eyes were wide open and empty. The second knight next to him had thrown Adokas away, drawn his sword, and ran towards Cheyenne's companion. He raised his sword and with all his strength attacked Glacio, whose lowered sword pointed to the ground. He didn't even seem to notice that the knight was about to attack him, for he stood with his back turned to his enemy and looked at the corpse. "He's about to kill Glacio! Why don't you turn around?" Cheyenne wanted to warn him, but couldn't make a sound. The pain was too great and the grip of her counterpart was too strong and constricting. She would only be able to watch desperately as the knight kills the young man, and then she would be next. The attacker's sword went down and would hit Glacio's head right away. The idea of his head being split into two was cruel but real, and it would happen at any moment. Cheyenne sobbed and felt tears rolling down her cheek. "I'm sorry I dragged you into this, Glacio. I shouldn't have allowed anyone to accompany me. Now he has to die because of me. And I'll never see Xaver again. He will wait in vain for me, and then I will find him too and kill him. Oh!" When the girl had already given up all hope, the young man turned around in a flash and blocked the attack with his sword at the last second. His ice blue hair rose into the air as it turned, before hanging down quietly again. He took advantage of the element of surprise that arose and stabbed the astonished knight with his ice sword into the heart. This time, too, the armor did not bring the knight any protection, and he sank to the ground, gasping for air, chuckling and dying. After Glacio pulled the sword out of the enemy's chest. The last man in armor looked back, curious by the sound of the fight. He saw that his colleagues were no longer alive and that their killer was slowly walking a few steps towards him. His sword pointed at him defiantly. Cheyenne's companion looked really scary and dangerous at that moment, and she was glad that he was on her side and wanted to save her. Adokas had pulled himself together again and came to the healer's side, growing menacingly and baring his teeth. But when the knight made no attempt to let go of Cheyenne, Glacio issued a warning. "Let go of this girl right now." The enemy began to sweat and pulled Cheyenne forward, only to push her back again with a tremendous force. She cried out in pain as she crashed into the tree and sank to the ground, trembling. Then the knight came up to the young man and attacked him. The man in armor did his best to put all his strength into the attack, but Glacio always dodged elegantly or blocked. It almost looked like he was dancing and just playing with the knight instead of fighting seriously. For him, it seemed like a no-brainer to trick his enemy, and maybe he just wanted to make the sluggish man tired. Apparently, this was exactly his plan, because when the young healer noticed that his opponent's attack was waning, and his attention as well, Glacio put a leg on him and the knight fell over, falling to the ground. Before he knew it, Cheyenne's companion pointed the ice blade at the enemy's neck and whispered a few words. "I would love to see you suffer and slit your throat, watching as you can't breathe and suffocate miserably. Just as you always watch your victims suffer and laugh at them. But I'm not on the same level as you, you're lucky. I give you a quick death." Glacio closed his eyes briefly, opened them again, lifted his head a little and rammed his sword into the knight's chest. As he pulled it out and walked towards Cheyenne, Adokas was already with her, licking her face. Her rescuer inquired in a calm voice how she was doing. "Is everything all right, little angel?"